Hello, Zaha. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your work and for the entire team at BuildPalestine. This is really, truly an amazing gathering of Palestinians. I think we're close to 2,000 participants or registrants. So I'm really honored to be moderating this opening panel of the summit. The theme of the summit and this panel, Palestinian unity, is a beautiful one. Particularly after we saw recently during the Unity Intifada in 2021, what unity means and what it could look like. If you are a Palestinian, you know and that simply asserting your identity is an act of resistance. And if you are a Palestinian living in the diaspora, particularly in the West, being Palestinian can also mean your existence and identity are frequently the subject of debate or disparagement. This is by design, of course, not by accident. Growing up mostly in the US, as I have, whatever international conflict or event was taking place in the Middle East, whether it was the Arab oil embargo, the Iran hostage crisis, or the Iraq war, I could be sure that I would be blamed or otherized by my neighbors, classmates, or even teachers. Being otherized by those who don't know you or your people's history is painful. It makes you crave to be among your own, to feel you're not a stranger, to be seen, to be understood. That's why I welcomed it when my parents moved my family back to Palestine to live. It was the best thing they could have done for us. But the truth of it is, I wasn't entirely welcomed initially in my Palestinian community either. For a long time, me and my siblings were seen as ajanib, foreigners in our own home. For me, that was infinitely more painful than being otherized in the United States. So during this panel, we will not only talk about what brings us together as Palestinians, we'll also talk about the things that divide us. The panelists for today's conversation are Asil Al-Badja, a researcher with Al-Haq, a prominent human rights organization in Ramallah. Asil's family is originally from Lifta, Palestine. We also have Ahmed Mansour, a film director and creative from Gaza, who is currently showcasing art he's curated featuring youth from Gaza for the Museum of the Palestinian People in Washington, D.C. Our third panelist was supposed to be Amjad Iraqi, a talented writer and thinker living inside the Green Line, whose family returned to the homeland after years living in the diaspora in Nigeria and in Kuwait. Amjad is someone like me who is all too familiar with the feeling of being a stranger, including in our own homeland. Unfortunately, Amjad has decided to withdraw from the event after questions were raised by some summit participants about his participation. We thought it would be best for him to explain why he's withdrawing from the summit in his own words. So to read his statement, we have with us Inas Abdulrazik, BuildPalestine board member. Go ahead, Inas.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. It's so great to be with you again for another summit this year. It's our third, and it's always a really big pleasure, especially because I've been also behind the scenes and seeing the team's wonderful work to put this together. I think I want to tackle, actually, I think we're starting the summit with one of the, I think, key and sensitive issues and discussions that are happening within our movement among Palestinians. So I was wondering, Zaha, do you want me to read Amjad's words, or will you?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think you have the statement if you'd like to read it, and then we can talk a little bit about that as a group.
Okay. So I think what I'll do is first I'll read Amjad's statement. Amjad decided to step away because of who he worked with, and we have difficult conversations these days about normalization, anti-normalization. I think we're all anti-normalization, but the question is, what does it mean? So I want to read Amjad's words first, and then I think we'll raise other points and questions that his withdrawal have brought to the front. So, dear friends and colleagues, in light of some recent discontent among several speakers regarding my affiliation with Plus 972 magazine, I decided to withdraw my participation from today's panel so as not to cause further trouble to the organizers or to put any fellow Palestinian speakers in discomfort. I sincerely understand the critical views raised and deeply empathize with the reasons behind them. It is still unfortunate that a summit about unity should have to witness a live demonstration of this unity, based on what I fear are simplistic and mistaken assumptions about who I am, what my site represents, and what counts as legitimate Palestinian movement work. We are a diverse and complex society, with many gray zones and contradictions, and any attempt to pretend otherwise or to enforce a singular view of what we should be and how we should struggle is a misrepresentation of who we are and a hindrance to our cause. All the same, I do not wish to be a source of tension at this event and hope the summit moves forward in good spirits. I'm grateful to the organizers for their support and hard work and look forward to watching the summit as a fellow Palestinian. Now back to me as Ines Abdelazeh. This was Amjad Ilaq's words. I first want to reiterate that, I deeply respect Amjad Ilaqi as a friend, as a journalist, and I think he works for a website, Plus 972 magazine, which is a media that I think he actually, as someone from 1948 Palestine, has really pushed forward to change. And has pushed forward to really be doing some important work and to shift the organization to comply with, what is actually defined as what normalization is and what it isn't. So Plus 972 magazine has evolved to have editorial guidelines that recognize that we're all fighting the same thing: settler colonialism, apartheid, that we want to liberate our people, and that all of our people deserve their right to return and to live freely between the river and the sea. So I think what has unfolded there is a lot of the sensitive conversations that we're having among each other as Palestinians, and things that are, I think, trying to divide our movements. I don't think there is a debate here among everyone participating here that normalization is harmful. It's not debating whether normalization is good or not, but what is it? When is it normalization? Do we all have the same understanding of what is harmful and constructive in leading to the liberation of our people from the river to the sea? So we certainly need red lines, but I think there is also questions about what those red lines are in a very complex reality that we live in. And I think, Zaha, Bisan, I think some of you reminded also what we live under. We have been deliberately fragmented, not only geographically, but socially. We have been placed into positions where we have different ID papers. We're in different geographies. Some of us are rich, some of us are poor, some of us are, extremely just diverse in terms of the realities we live in, and that's inherently a result of being under colonization for so long. And the question for us then is, how can we build an inclusive movement for liberation? One that among us as Palestinians recognizes our different realities: refugees, 48ers, women, men, Christians, Muslims. All of these are important questions that I feel sometimes bring these tough questions. And it's unfortunate that today it feels like, we are also in an era where bullying, canceling each other on social media, calling each other out, instead of having constructive discussions first among ourselves, is often what is happening. And we don't have to be naive. This will continue to happen. And I feel, and I deeply think that this is also playing within the Zionist narrative. This is playing into the strengths of our occupier, of our colonizer. And I think we need to address these and be able to discuss these things in safe spaces, having those conversations around what are the values, what are the principles that we want to defend, and whether any behavior, institutional affiliation, or activities is harming this or not. But we should not go about attacking each other as individuals, especially when we're all fighting for the same goal. It must not be about personal ego. It must not be about fame and wanting likes or who's right or wrong on, especially on social media, where the debate is often quite short-sighted and limited. We have to lift each other up. Just like we often say as women in the feminist movement, we all have to, strive for sisterhood and for lifting each other up. As Palestinians, we do not have a choice. We cannot take each other down. And I think the question also becomes when, to really have this tough conversations about where does this lead us? Are we going to start canceling our Palestinian friends who work with Al Jazeera, an international channel for whom our beloved and missed Shireen Abu Akleh was working, but is also a channel that is platforming Zionists and Israelis? Are we going to start canceling people like Sami Abu Shhadeh and people in 48 who are part of political movements, but are also participating in the Knesset? We live in a very complex reality where a lot of us Palestinians live inherently in deep contradictions, especially those of us who are on the ground in Palestine. Because one way or another, we all have our contradictions where by crossing a checkpoint, we are somehow normalizing a situation that's not normal. And I think for us, it's about how do we fight this and how do we find safe spaces where we really fight divisions, we fight the suspicion, we create the trust. All of these important questions that we actually deeply care about and are all about the panels that you're going to hear from today. And I think this is so important because all of the discussions that are happening in the next 2 days are tackling in one way or another these very tough conversations. I think I'm also conscious that we have different circles where all these debates and discussions are happening, especially those where it's in English and others in Arabic. But I would say that, we can disagree personally. We all have our personal choices. We can decide to withdraw. We can decide to disagree, but we should not take each other down. And I think when it comes to personal choices, to decide or to disagree with the choices made by another fellow Palestinian, we should be, deeply doing it with love, with care, and not to take each other down. So can our vision evolve? Are all these difficult questions about the space for where the space for Jewish allies in the movement and whatnot? All of these very tough questions. We don't always have answers for them, but we need to be able to create those safe spaces in order to be able to give those answers together, and also recognize that we might have ideological or ideas differences, and I think that's healthy. Every society have them, but they shouldn't be, they should be lived again healthily, with care and love, and make sure that we all fight against what we're all here to fight for, which is our liberation. And so I'm really thankful that the BuildPalestine Summit exists, because I feel that this is also a space where we can address those tough questions. And I know myself that I come here and speak now about this issue with some level of fear and some level of, consciousness that there is, people who will disagree. There is people who might go about canceling or bullying. And I think we shouldn't think about those things, and we should really come with an open mind and make sure we understand, again, what is it that we're fighting for in terms of values, and how among Palestinians in our very diverse and different realities, we also fight together in those contradictions we all live in.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Ines. Thank you for stepping in to kind of give us that context. We had planned when we had our conversations about this panel together, Ahmed, Asil, and Amjad and I, that we were going to talk about these issues because we definitely knew they were something that we needed to address. We didn't realize it was going to be something that came up that would cause Amjad to withdraw, however, and so this was an unfortunate situation, but it is an opportunity at the same time. And I really want to give Ahmed an opportunity to talk about in his own experiences how this has come up internally as we relate to our own community, the instances in which you felt like you were an imposter, or maybe you weren't Palestinian enough, or maybe your work wasn't in alignment with maybe what other folks thought is should be centered in the movement. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then to Asil.
Can you hear me? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
I'm very happy to first get up early. It's 8:12 here. And the first thing I opened is the laptop, and I heard Lama introducing Bisan. And gosh, that gave me a lot. It made me smile hearing two articulated Palestinian women, and then hearing Ines, and then being introduced by Zaha, and having Asil here as well. That makes my morning be part of 5 women. And this takes me back to my 5 sisters that I left them 7 years ago in Gaza. So I'm very fortunate. I'm very happy. Thank you for having me. And thank you for really being honest about this space and asking the tough questions. I do believe that we're very emotional. And I think this space is unique in my perspective, where it's gonna show us as raw as possible. And this is, I think, how true movements for liberation start. So my name is Ahmed Mansour. I am turning 30 this November 1st. I'm Scorpio, Agrab. I was born and raised in Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the middle area of Gaza Strip. Of course, as any Gazawi, the first thing I remember, and we talked about this with Zaha and Asil and Amjad in our talk. First thing I remember in my adulthood is that my cousins were shooting at each other. The 2007 division, Assam. And all of a sudden, the Fatah people would call it Inqilab, and the Hamas people would call it Hasam. And I can see both mothers were crying their eyes out for their children that they lost to this Inqilab or Hasam. But for me, as a little child, my father and my grandfather used to tell me that this is the worst. This is Karitha, a disaster. And of course, this disaster shaped the collective conscience of the entire generation, my generation, those are born in the 90s. So with that, the Israelis imposed, as a result, Hamas came to power, Israel imposed the siege, and then, of course, sorry to say it, we lived the first war, we lived the second war, the third war. Come 2014, the worst war that I lived personally, and I remember going to my grandfather, asking him big questions about that war. And basically, he opened his heart for me for the first time, that he lived through the Palestinian revolution in the 30s, and then the Nakba in 48, and then the Naksa, and then the Intifadas, and nothing was like that war. So he advised me to leave, go abroad. I remember he told me that liberation will come from outside. I don't know, what does that mean? But I think when I left, I had no idea that I'm going to land in the US, in New York, and then now in Washington. So this is just an introduction where I'm coming from and what I'm going to talk about and how I see things. الإنسان أسير تجاربه. Accept what we gain by knowledge and hearing other experiences. So back to the question, and I'm gonna bounce back to Asil. When I do not feel my Palestinianism among ourselves, because I would say we're talking about unity. I don't want to talk about Israel. Israel is are the occupiers, right? And I asked my mother the other day, I said, what if we wake up tomorrow and the apartheid regime is collapsed? What do you think is going to happen? She said, we're going to kill each other. I said, what makes you say that? She said, when they pulled out of Gaza, we killed each other. So I want to talk about the Palestinian circles as a young Palestinians coming from home to the diaspora. In my opinion, what's the main challenge that I've been facing so far is generational. Is when I speak something about our movement, I immediately am canceled because what do I know? I'm too young. And I have more to say about that, but I want to just leave Asil because I took a lot of time.
Thank you, first of all, for Palestine for organizing this amazing conference with this very much needed topic to brainstorm and discuss and build on the inspiring Unity Intifada from last year. And I'm very honored to be sharing the panel with Ahmed and Zaha and Ines. Also very sorry that Amjad was not able, or he was forced basically not to participate. I think the issue of exclusion is really one of the barriers to basically having a unified or to avoid the fragmentation of the Palestinian people. We usually tend to basically exclude people from the struggle towards liberation because of, as Ines put it, we live in a world or a reality of contradictions. And I think each of one has something representing basically this contradiction. For me, myself, for example, I see myself, or like just answering the specific question that Zaha, you posed, if I've ever felt or received judgments that I'm not Palestinian enough. I think the first thing is that being born in Ramallah and also living here in Ramallah, there's like this kind of judgment that you're in the bubble, that you cannot maybe represent or talk on behalf of the Palestinian people if you are in this privileged space. And I do acknowledge that it is a better condition, like Ramallah, for example, is in a better circumstances than other fragmented Palestinian villages and communities. But I think we have to basically acknowledge that at the end of the day, we are all colonized as a people and occupied, and how the occupation is manifested on each particular category of Palestinians is different, and there are certain levels and forms and of how the Zionist settler colonial project basically dominate the Palestinian people. So I think this is one of maybe the main things, but also working in a human rights organization and using the tool of international law basically to do advocacy work around issues of ending the occupation and liberation in Palestine is also sometimes critiqued. And critique is really great, but sometimes there's exclusion, whereby if some people would say that you're using this liberal space that was the international law that was created by colonial powers to serve their purposes and to basically maintain the status quo. And so you're basically, you in this place, in this human rights organization or that human rights organization, and employing like your mandate working on international law is also not that beneficial to the Palestinian cause. And this is your Palestinianness is not enough. So also these are some of the things that we also live under, and I think we could brainstorm more into the discussion of how I personally perceive my work as a potential tool of change, basically. You're muted, I think.
Thank you for reminding me to unmute. You and Ahmed have talked about some of the challenges. You're talking about sort of, how it is to work in the particular field you work, and how, in some sense, you're complicit in legitimizing sort of the occupation, and somehow because you're using this tool that is a tool of the colonizer to try to work towards liberation. Ahmed's talking about generational divides. The challenges seem almost insurmountable given how we've been dispersed, and how that has impacted our consciousness and our context. But at the same time, during the Unity Intifada, we saw that our fragmentation can be our superpower, right? It was during the Unity Intifada where we saw, Jerusalem being cut, the Palestinians being cut off from Jerusalem, and the response from Palestinians in 48 was to come out, bring their cars, pick up their Palestinian brothers and sisters, and to drive them into Jerusalem. So there's all these examples during that period as well that really show that these obstacles are not necessarily insurmountable, and in fact they can be reinforcing the commonality of our existence as Palestinians. So I'd like to shift then to hear from Ines and the rest of you, sort of how you envision all of these ways in which we're divided as actually being a way we can unite and liberate ourselves. I know that's a big question. That's a tall order, but we're brainstorming here and imagining, because that's what we do at BuildPalestine.
Thanks, Zahab, and I'll start. I think like in many, we're a very unique place, but also we have a lot of lessons from history. And so I think there has been other revolutions, there has been other people fighting for their liberations, people living under colonial ruling. So it's very clear that actually a lot of the people who have been forced to exile, that exile was also made into a strength. And I think this for us is super important. I myself grew up mainly in diaspora. I'm back now in the country. I think I can see the very varied and diverse set of experiences from our people, depending on where we're from. But I also think, yeah, that is a very much of a strength. And often the people who are in exile, especially those living with rights, with civil and political rights where they are, have an ability to speak out and to organize, and sometimes that we don't have when we're in Palestine, and a lot of our people don't have. So, we have people here on the ground who are really paying with their lives, and the risk to being politically active is extremely high. And I think that's our duty when we are outside or have an international platform, to recognize, to use our privileges, and to actually use them as a strength. So again, instead of not canceling each other or saying who's wrong, who's right, who's more Palestinian or less Palestinian, we're all Palestinians, but we also come, some of us, with a set of privileges that we can use. We have right now friends. There are 30 prisoners who have started a hunger strike. They're currently in admin arbitrary detention, including my friend Salah Hamouri, who's a French Palestinian human rights defender, works with Ad-Damir. And it's our duty to also be able to help him and the other prisoners to be freed. And their only weapon at the moment is a hunger strike. So I feel like this is how we should build with each other's strengths. And again, I think being able to have those spaces. So I remember the first year we organized the Build Summit, I think it was just COVID, and we kind of were forced to do it online at the end. But I think it's also a strength of it that we can do it online, because a lot of us, cannot travel to Palestine. A lot of us cannot travel outside and have travel bans. Some of the speakers this weekend cannot travel outside. So having it online, having those spaces where we should be able to debate with each other and to discuss, I think, these important questions and what can be done is the constructive way to do it. We really cannot afford to be distracted. And we also have built tools that are, really important. So the BDS movement, when they first started and until today, there has been multiple consensus-built conversations around building guidelines of what it means to be normalizing or not. For example, going back to the first topic. So I think we should use all these platforms that we have built. And I feel like we should also use each other organizations. So I work on international campaigning and more like political work internationally for our cause. But I don't do research. I use what Al-Haq does in terms of monitoring, having people on the ground, being there every day to monitor violations, to inform and report on these things. And that is super important to build on each other's work and reinforce each other's struggle, whether it's in art or in human rights work, to be able to build a really constructive movement, and to also give a platform and a voice to those who are most marginalized and in danger.
So Ahmed, to you, how can our fragmentation be our strength, and how can we use art, and how have you used art to defragment Palestine and Palestinians?
First, I really like how you ask the questions and how you provoke us, Zaha, because the word we're here to imagine, and a lot of people, when I talk or when I make a film, when I curate an art exhibit, they tell me that I have such a big imagination. And I tell them, when you grew up in Gaza, the only thing you have is imagination. So bear with me now. I'm gonna throw like a few things just to like imagine together. I mean, first, I thought we were divided, but in the 2021 uprising, I think we prove to ourselves that we as people, as Palestinians, are united, but our political decision is not. So it's really, really important to get that. As someone from Gaza, I've been meeting Palestinians from all over the world in my exile, in my 7 years exile. And whenever they hear that I'm from Gaza, you know, their facial expression change, that they're proud and that they admit that Gaza is keeping the Palestinian conscience and compass in line. And that's, a few exceptions, wouldn't think that, but that shows that, I personally when I was in Gaza, I thought that no one cares. And this is the same feeling of 2 million people in Gaza. They do believe no one cares. And just maybe a side note, we always have to reach out to the people of Gaza. We are in the diaspora to show them that we care, because they really, really, if you're in their position, you would think the same thing. Nobody cares. But I think people here do care, but we're bad at expressing it. So I have a point about the normalization as well. Very often, again, one of our problems as well is that we are a little bit too academic. I'm pragmatic. I'm from the art side, so I say things as they are. But very often, since I've been here, a lot of Palestinians in the diaspora, young people like me, they're amazing, but they're always have these questions about their identity and what makes us Palestinians and and stuff. And I always say to them that it's never about who are you. It's never about who you are. It's about where you are. And very often we are always in between two things. We're coming out of an experience and getting into another experience. So, and even the first question that God asked Adam when he approached that tree, he of course, God knows where is Adam, but he told him, he asked, "Where are you?" So, where are you? Who you are very often opens. It's the capitalists would love that, because when you question who you are, then they have stuff to sell you, right? But when you ask where you are, where are you, then responsibility comes out of it. So for me, anybody can be a Palestinian, depending on what responsibility they're taking towards this issue. I would very often say, since we've been using the word liberation, very often I ask my Palestinian Americans here if they think liberation is a right, and they think, of course, is a right, and I say, yes, it is a right, but what's more than a right is liberation is a responsibility. What are you doing that you can claim that liberation is your right? Right? We cannot just be sitting around the cafes as we used to do in Gaza, and we just solve all the world's problems, and we're not doing anything on the ground. So it's not who you are, it's where you are and what responsibility are you taking towards this issue. So art, actually in a few hours. So I started curating art exhibit in Gaza in 2013, and now I'm back to it with the museum here in Washington. And in a few hours, we have an opening of a new exhibit called The Art of Weeping. And my philosophy with art is always paves the way for us, right? What we can imagine here, we can reflect it in artistic mediums, and then the public can see that closer to them, and then they can adopt it, and then a change can happen. So my philosophy of to your question, Zaha, is liberation requires preparation. And what's beautiful about this statement, that it rhymes both in Arabic and English. التحرير يتطلب التحضير. Again, we can always say that, yes, liberation is our right, but actually, what are we doing about it? So what does that mean? Liberation requires preparation. التحرير يتطلب التحضير. It means that there are a few steps to qualify us to be liberators, right? For example, the Oslo experience, why it failed, because we were not qualified. We were just like thrown, and we're like excited, and everybody cheering, but without any depth. So what's the first act? What's the first item on the preparation list? It's the art of weeping. And this is actually the name of the art exhibit that we're having today, the opening. It's going to be here for a few months. Please, anybody who's listening to us or here in the panel, please come to it. So art is so amazing. We Palestinians we have a very just cause, but we're not really, we're nailing it in terms of presenting it, but we're not there yet. So some of you might ask why the art of weeping, and why I say weeping is the first act of resistance, is because we Palestinians from inception, we've never had any peace moments from 48, and we've been living disaster after disaster, disaster after disaster. We've never been allowed to acknowledge our pain. We've never been allowed to pay respect to our pain, and the pain is tremendous here. For example, whenever I used to cry when I was young, my father would come and beat the shit out of me, because he would say, no men should cry in this house. So this is how our parents raises us, because you have to be tough, right? But since I came here, all of a sudden I'm having so much freedom that I didn't know what to do with it. I was depressed because I had so much freedom at first. So acknowledging, paying respect. Unless we pay respect to our pain, no one will. And I want to throw this at you guys also. Maybe I'm going to get it part of the discussion. Next year is very crucial in the Palestinian struggle. Next year is the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. What does that mean? It means that the generation of the Nakba, they're dying. I only have one grandfather who's alive. Why are we so in love with our cause and why we're working for our cause is because we have a lived experience of the Nakba. We heard the stories from our grandparents. For my kids, they won't be having this luxury to have a lived memory of the generation of the Nakba. So it's very crucial. We live in a very crucial moment in the collective memory of the Palestinian people. So for me, the opening of the art exhibit, The Art of Weeping, today is the opening of the year of sadness, عام الحزن, for next year. Is we acknowledge, we're working on launching a big campaign to document to record every man and woman who lived the Nakba, because they're very few. And then I'm planning to have a conference on the memory. How are we going to shape the memory for the next generation, right? So why I'm talking about all of this is because art allows me to do it, and then allows us to imagine it, and then what we talk about can be reflected in these different artistic mediums, whether it's art exhibits, whether it's films, and whether it's storytelling.
Thanks, Ahmed. You raise a really important point here that we discussed when we chatted before, which is the way in which our trauma is what unites us. Maybe it's the trauma of Sabra and Shatila that first made me question what is it what is it to be Palestinian? Are we Palestinian? I hadn't known that until Sabra and Shatila. And I started talking to my father about who were these people that died. And it's unfortunate that our traumas tend to be the thing that unite us and give us strength to organize together and do these things. And so at this last few minutes, I want to take it to Asil for her to talk about that. How does she see our fragmentation as our strength? How does she feel that these moments of trauma, how they bring us together, and how we can use that moving forward? And with that, we will close our session. Asil, you're muted.
Sorry. I think of how we can use basically our fragmentation as strength. We could conclude this from the example you gave on during the unity uprising last May, with this example where Palestinians from 48 from Jerusalem were picking up Palestinians from Jerusalem. I think in that moment, what the scene was focusing on, or Palestinians were focusing on, is a common goal of liberation, instead of focusing on our differences, which is, as Ines said, is a normal thing in any society. We have our social, political, cultural differences, and it's more complex in the Palestinian context. So I think in that examples, you could see that there was the Palestinians were creating these creative modes of avoiding and dismantling the fragmentation, because the main focus was on a common goal of confronting basically the Israelis. And so I think we need to do more of that. And unfortunately, after the unity uprising this year, we have seen a lot of incitement to violence and hatred, and whether online or in the streets as well. And I think in order to basically strengthen our unity, we need to accept our differences. We don't necessarily need to agree with each other, but at least we need to not incite on violence towards each other if we don't agree with how we perceive our future. And another thing is that this idea of also canceling each other and excluding people because of their values and beliefs is also a very problematic issue towards our unity. And so I think the main thing is just to accept each other in order to basically have a healthy discussion of how we can build our unified, collective political project towards liberation by basically transcending all these years and decades of fragmentation against the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Asil. Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, Ines, for this really rich conversation. I really appreciated the fact that you brought yourselves to this discussion and didn't hold back. So thank you, especially to you, Ines, for stepping in. I really appreciate that. And back to the Build Palestine folks with the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zaha.
Thank you, Zaha. Thank you, Ines. Thank you, Asil.
Thanks, Ahmed. يعطيكم العافية.
الله يعافيك يا رب.